The whispers started the moment Dorothy Fletcher walked past the general store, and by the time she reached the butcher's shop, the laughter had begun in earnest. She held her basket tighter against her hip, feeling the weight of 23 pairs of eyes boring into her back as she moved through the dusty main street of Spokane, Washington on that sweltering July afternoon in 1883. The wooden sidewalks creaked beneath her worn boots, each step echoing her isolation in a town that had already decided her worth. "There goes the Barren one," Martha Henderson's voice carried clear across the street, intentionally loud enough for Dorothy to hear every syllable. 5 years, married, and not a single child to show for it. What kind of woman cannot give her husband a son? Dorothy's fingers trembled as she reached for the butcher's door handle, but she steadied them through sheer force of will. She had learned long ago that showing weakness in Spokane only invited more cruelty. The town had grown rapidly over the past decade, fueled by the arrival of the Northern Pacific Railway in 1881, bringing with it prosperity and a harsh judgment of anyone who did not fit the mold of what they considered proper frontier life. Inside the shop, Harold Thompson barely glanced at her before turning his attention back to the string of sausages he was hanging. "What do you want?" he asked, his tone suggesting she was interrupting something far more important. "2 pounds of beef, please," Dorothy said quietly, setting her coins on the scarred wooden counter. "And a ham hock if you have one to spare," Harold grunted, taking his time wrapping the meat in brown paper. "Your husband know you're spending his money on ham." "Seems wasteful for a woman who cannot even fill a cradle." The words struck like a physical blow, but Dorothy kept her chin up. "Thomas trusts me with the household accounts." "More fool him," Harold muttered, sliding the package across the counter with enough force that it nearly toppled over the edge. "That will be $1.20. Dorothy counted out the coins carefully, her hands steady despite the burning shame that crawled up her neck. She had been enduring comments like these for months now, ever since Dr. Morrison had made his pronouncement at the church social. The good doctor, deep in his cups, had loudly declared that Dorothy Fletcher would never bear children, that her womb was as barren as the alkali flats east of town. He had no medical basis for such a claim, had never even examined her properly, but his words carried the weight of authority in Spokane, and the town had latched onto them with vicious glee. The worst part was that Thomas, her husband of 5 years, had not defended her. He had simply stood there, red-faced and silent, before walking away and leaving her alone in a circle of pitying and mocking stares. Since that night, he had grown more distant, spending his evenings at the saloon and his days working their small ranch with a grim determination that spoke of disappointment and resentment. Dorothy gathered her packages and walked back out into the afternoon heat. The sun beat down mercilessly on the dirt streets, and she could feel sweat trickling down her spine beneath her simple cotton dress. Spokane in summer was a study in extremes, the days scorching hot while the nights brought blessed relief. She had grown up in this territory, had watched it transform from wild frontier to established town, and she had always believed she would find her place here. Now she wondered if that had been nothing more than a foolish dream. "Look at her walking around like she has any business holding her head up," another voice called out, and this time Dorothy could not help but turn to see who had spoken. It was Susan Crawford, standing outside the millinery with 3 other women, all of them respectable mothers with children clinging to their skirts. Susan's hand rested protectively on her swollen belly, her 7th pregnancy in 9 years of marriage. "A woman without children is hardly a woman at all," Susan continued, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Just a burden on her husband, taking up space and resources that could go to a real family. The other women laughed, a sound that cut through Dorothy like broken glass. She turned away quickly, not wanting them to see the tears that threatened to spill over. Her feet carried her automatically toward the edge of town, toward the small house she shared with Thomas, but she found herself stopping instead at the weathered fence that bordered the main corral. She needed a moment to compose herself before facing an empty home and another evening of Thomas's cold silence. The corral held a dozen horses, some belonging to the livery and others to various ranchers who had business in town. Dorothy watched them move in the dust, their powerful bodies gleaming with sweat, and felt a kinship with these working animals. They too existed only to serve, valued only for what they could produce. "They have sharp tongues in this town," a deep voice said from behind her, startling her so badly she nearly dropped her basket. "And small minds to match." Dorothy spun around to find a man leaning against the fence post about 10 feet away. She had not heard him approach, which spoke to her distraction as much as his quiet movements. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscular build of someone who spent his life working hard. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with deep lines around his eyes that suggested he was somewhere in his late 20s or early 30s. Dark hair fell to his collar beneath a dusty hat, and his gray-blue eyes held an intelligence and kindness that was rare in Spokane these days. "I apologize for startling you, madam," he continued, touching the brim of his hat in a gesture of respect. "I did not mean to intrude on your thoughts." "You did not intrude," Dorothy said, then realized how her voice shook and hated herself for the weakness. She cleared her throat. "I mean, it is a public space. You have as much right to be here as anyone." The man pushed off from the fence post and took a few steps closer, though he maintained a respectful distance. Now that he was nearer, Dorothy could see the details that marked him as a working cowboy rather than a town dweller. His clothes were worn but clean, his boots scuffed from hours in the stirrup, and a rope scar marked the back of his right hand. He wore a gun at his hip, but it sat easy there, a tool rather than a threat. "Zachary Morrison," he said, extending his hand. "Though I go by Zach, I have been working the Broken Arrow Ranch about 15 miles north of here for the past 3 months. Dorothy hesitated only a moment before accepting his handshake. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip firm but gentle. "Dorothy Fletcher," she replied, then watched his expression carefully for any sign of recognition or judgment. Instead, he simply nodded. "Pleased to make your acquaintance, Mrs. Fletcher. I have been meaning to come into town for supplies for the better part of a week, but the herd keeps me busy most days." "Morrison," Dorothy repeated, something clicking in her memory. "Are you related to Dr. Morrison?" Zach's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Unfortunately, yes. He is my uncle, though I claim the relation with no pride. I left home at 16 to get away from his particular brand of righteousness, and have been working ranches across the territory ever since. I only took the job at the Broken Arrow because it pays well, and I am trying to save enough to start my own spread." Dorothy felt something loosen in her chest, a tension she had not realized she was carrying. If he knew about Dr. Morrison's character, then perhaps he had also heard the doctor's pronouncement about her. And if he was still standing here talking to her with respect in his eyes, perhaps not everyone in the territory thought her worthless. "I heard what those women said to you just now," Zach continued, his voice gentle but firm. "And I heard what Thompson said in the shop before that. I was picking up supplies at the feed store across the street." Shame flooded through Dorothy again, hot and suffocating. She turned away, unable to meet his eyes. "Then you know what I am, what everyone thinks I am." I know what they think, Zach agreed, but thinking a thing does not make it true. My uncle is a drunk and a bully who likes to throw his weight around and pretend his opinions are medical fact. He has been doing it for years, and people believe him because he has a diploma on his wall and they do not know any better. Dorothy blinked hard against the tears that wanted to fall. No one had spoken to her like this in months, had treated her as though she deserved basic human dignity. The kindness in Zach Morrison's voice threatened to break through all her carefully constructed defenses. "It does not matter if it is true or not," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "The whole town believes it. My own husband believes it. I am marked now, labeled as defective, and nothing I say or do will change that. Then maybe it is time to stop caring what small-minded people think," Zach said. He moved closer, close enough that she could smell the honest scent of leather and horses and sunshine on him. "You strike me as someone with more strength than you give yourself credit for, Mrs. Fletcher. The way you held your head up walking through that gauntlet of gossips, the way you kept your voice steady when Thompson insulted you to your face, that takes courage." "It takes desperation," Dorothy corrected bitterly. "What choice do I have? I cannot leave. I have no family except Thomas, no money of my own, nowhere to go. I must endure their cruelty because the alternative is worse." Zach was quiet for a long moment, and when Dorothy finally worked up the nerve to look at him again, she found him studying her with an intensity that made her breath catch. There was something in his expression that she could not quite name, a combination of admiration and determination that seemed out of place in this conversation with a stranger. "Everyone has choices," he said finally. "Sometimes they are hard choices. Sometimes they feel impossible, but they are there. And from what I have seen in just these few minutes, you are stronger than you believe." Before Dorothy could respond, a commotion erupted from the direction of the general store. Raised voices carried across the street, and Dorothy recognized Thomas's angry tone even before she turned to see him striding toward her with fury written across his face. Her husband was a stocky man of average height, with thinning brown hair and a face that had once been handsome but had grown hard over the years. He worked their small ranch with competent determination, but there had never been much warmth between them, even in the early days of their marriage. "What the hell do you think you are doing?" Thomas demanded as he approached, his eyes flickering between Dorothy and Zach with undisguised suspicion. "Susan Crawford just told me you were out here talking to some strange man like a common whore." Dorothy flinched at the word, but before she could speak, Zach stepped forward. His posture was relaxed, but there was steel underneath the easy stance. "You might want to watch your language when speaking to your wife," Zach said calmly. "We were having a perfectly innocent conversation about horses. I am Zachary Morrison, working at the Broken Arrow Ranch. You must be Thomas Fletcher. I have heard good things about your operation." Thomas's face reddened further. "I do not care who you are or what you have heard. My wife has no business talking to strange men without my presence. It is inappropriate and gives people the wrong idea." "The only people with the wrong idea are those spreading gossip and making assumptions," Zach replied, his voice still calm but with an edge now. Mrs. Fletcher was conducting herself with perfect propriety. "Perhaps you should be more concerned about why the women in this town feel entitled to insult her openly in the street. What happens between me and my wife is none of your concern," Thomas snapped. He grabbed Dorothy's arm with enough force to make her gasp. "Come on, we are going home." Dorothy had no choice but to follow, her basket clutched against her chest and her heart pounding. As Thomas dragged her away, she glanced back once to see Zach standing by the fence, his expression dark with anger but his eyes locked on her with something that looked like concern. Then Thomas jerked her around a corner and Zach disappeared from view. The walk back to their small ranch house on the edge of town was conducted in tense silence. Thomas's grip on her arm never loosened, his fingers digging into her flesh hard enough to leave bruises. Dorothy knew better than to protest or pull away. She had learned over the years that Thomas's anger burned hot but fast, and the best strategy was to remain quiet until it passed. Their house was modest. A two-room structure with a kitchen and sitting area in the front and a bedroom in the back. Thomas had built it himself when they married, proud of his craftsmanship, but over the years it had taken on a neglected air that matched the state of their marriage. Dorothy tried to keep it clean and comfortable, but without children to fill it with life and laughter, it felt more like a prison than a home. Thomas released her arm once they were inside, slamming the door behind them with enough force to rattle the windows. "Do you have any idea how it looks, you standing there talking to some cowboy where everyone can see? As if I do not have enough to deal with, having a barren wife who cannot give me children. Now I have to worry about you embarrassing me in front of the whole town." "I was not doing anything wrong," Dorothy said, keeping her voice level despite the fear and anger churning in her stomach. He introduced himself politely, and we spoke for perhaps 3 minutes about nothing of consequence. 3 minutes is 3 minutes too long, Thomas shot back. "You have no business talking to any man without me there. People already pity me for being stuck with a defective wife. I will not have them thinking you are also unfaithful." The injustice of his words burned like acid. "I have never been unfaithful to you, Thomas, not in thought or deed. You know that. I know that you have failed at the one job a wife is supposed to do," Thomas said cruelly. 5 years, Dorothy. 5 years and not even a hint of a child. Do you know what people say about me? They say I am not enough of a man to get my wife with child. They say maybe I should try harder or find a woman who actually works properly. Every day I have to face that humiliation because of you." Tears streamed down Dorothy's face now, but she refused to look away from him. "Dr. Morrison has no idea if I can have children or not. He made that pronouncement when he was drunk and has never examined me properly. Why do you believe him over me?" "Because 5 years is long enough to prove him right," Thomas said flatly. "And because I am tired of hoping for something that is never going to happen. I have been thinking, Dorothy. Thinking maybe it is time we consider other options." Something cold and terrible settled in Dorothy's stomach. "What kind of options?" Thomas looked away, unable or unwilling to meet her eyes. "Henry Carlson has a daughter, Melissa. She is 18 now, strong and healthy. He has mentioned more than once that she would make a good wife for a man with an established ranch." Understanding crashed over Dorothy like a wave of ice water. "You want to take another wife. You want to replace me." "Not replace," Thomas said, though his tone lacked conviction. "The territory allows a man to have more than one wife if he can provide for them. You could stay here, keep the house, and Melissa could give me the children I need." Dorothy felt as though the ground had dropped out from beneath her feet. Polygamy was not technically legal in Washington Territory, but in remote areas like Spokane, such arrangements were sometimes tolerated if done quietly. The thought of sharing her home, her husband, with another woman, a younger woman who could give Thomas what Dorothy apparently could not, was more than she could bear. "I will not agree to this," Dorothy said, her voice shaking but firm. "I am your wife, Thomas. For better or worse, in sickness and health. Those were the vows we took. And you have already broken them by failing to give me children," Thomas snapped. "I am not asking your permission, Dorothy. I am telling you what is going to happen. I have already spoken to Henry and he is agreeable. Melissa will move in here at the end of the month. You can accept it and make the best of the situation, or you can leave. Those are your choices." Dorothy stared at him, this man she had married with such hope 5 years ago, and barely recognized him. When had he become so hard, so cruel? Or had he always been this way, and she had simply been too naive to see it? "I need air," she said finally, setting her basket down on the table with trembling hands. "I cannot breathe in here." "Fine," Thomas said dismissively, already turning away from her. "But do not go wandering around town talking to strange men. You have caused enough gossip for one day." Dorothy did not bother responding. She walked out the back door and into the small yard behind the house, where she kept a vegetable garden and a few chickens. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The Spokane River ran about a quarter-mile from their property, and Dorothy found herself walking toward it, needing the sound of moving water to drown out the chaos in her mind. The river was running low this time of year, but it was still beautiful, cutting through the landscape like a silver ribbon. Dorothy sank down onto a flat rock near the bank and finally allowed herself to cry in earnest. Great, heaving sobs tore from her chest, carrying with them 5 years of disappointment, loneliness, and pain. She had tried so hard to be a good wife, to be patient and faithful and kind, but none of it had mattered. In the end, she was being discarded like a broken tool, replaced by a younger model who might work better. She did not know how long she sat there, but eventually, the tears ran dry and she was left with a hollow, numb feeling that was almost worse than the pain. The sun had sunk lower, and she knew she should return to the house to start preparing dinner, but she could not bring herself to move. What was the point? Why should she cook for a man who thought so little of her that he was willing to bring another woman into their home, Mrs. Fletcher? Dorothy jumped, her heart racing as she spun around to find Zach Morrison standing about 20 feet away, his hat in his hands and concern written across his face. For a moment, she could not find her voice, shocked that he had somehow found her here. "I apologize for intruding again," Zach said quietly. "I know I have no right to be here, but I was worried about you. I saw how your husband dragged you away, and I wanted to make sure you were all right." "How did you find me?" Dorothy asked, her voice hoarse from crying. "I asked around town about where you lived, then followed the path from your house. I could hear you crying from a distance." He took a few steps closer, his expression gentle. "Are you hurt? Did he hurt you?" Dorothy shook her head, then realized that was not entirely true. She pulled up her sleeve to reveal the darkening bruises on her arm where Thomas had gripped her. "Just bruises. Nothing I have not dealt with before." Zach's jaw clenched, and she saw his hands tighten around the brim of his hat. "A man who treats his wife that way is not worthy of the title husband." "He is angry," Dorothy said, though she did not know why she was defending Thomas. "The whole town treats him with pity because of me. I have failed him in the most fundamental way." "No," Zach said firmly, closing the distance between them and crouching down so he could look directly into her eyes. "You have not failed anyone. The failure is in him, in his lack of compassion and understanding, in his willingness to believe gossip over the evidence of his own experience with you." Dorothy felt fresh tears threatening and blinked them back. "You do not understand. He is planning to bring another woman into our home, a younger woman who can give him children. I will be nothing more than an unwanted relic, a first wife who could not fulfill her purpose." Zach's eyes blazed with anger, but his voice remained gentle. "Then leave. Leave him and this town and all these people who have decided your worth based on something you may not even be able to control." "And go where?" Dorothy asked bitterly. "I have no money, no family, no skills beyond keeping house and tending a garden. Where exactly would I go?" "You could come with me," Zach said, and the words hung in the air between them like something precious and impossible. I know we have only just met, and I know how that sounds, but hear me out. I have saved almost enough money to buy my own spread. There is a property about 40 miles north of here, good grazing land with a solid house and a clean creek running through it. The owner is willing to sell for a fair price. I was planning to run it alone at first, build it up slowly, but it would be better with a partner. Dorothy stared at him, unable to believe what she was hearing. You are suggesting I run away with a man I met only hours ago. That is madness. Maybe, Zach agreed with a slight smile. But is it any more mad than staying in a situation that is slowly destroying you? I am not suggesting anything improper, Mrs. Fletcher. I am suggesting a partnership, a fresh start for both of us. You could help me build something real, something that belongs to both of us. And if children come or do not come, that would be between us and no one else's business. You do not know me, Dorothy protested weakly, even as something deep inside her leaped at the possibility he was offering. You do not know if I would be a good partner or if we would suit each other at all. I know you have courage, Zach said. I know you have been enduring cruelty with grace and strength. I know you keep a garden and care for animals and manage a household despite being given no respect or appreciation for it. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. The rest we can figure out together. Dorothy stood up abruptly, pacing along the riverbank as her mind raced. It was insanity to even consider such a thing. Running away with a stranger, abandoning her marriage, starting over in an unknown place. Society would condemn her, the church would shun her, and she would be completely dependent on a man she barely knew. Every practical bone in her body screamed that it was a terrible idea. But another part of her, the part that had been slowly dying under the weight of Spokane's judgment and Thomas's coldness, whispered that it might be her only chance at happiness. At least with Zach Morrison, she would be taking a risk on something hopeful, something that held the possibility of kindness and respect. Staying with Thomas guaranteed only more humiliation and pain. I need time to think, Dorothy said finally, turning back to face Zach. This is not a decision I can make in a moment of emotional distress. Zach stood, setting his hat back on his head. Of course, I understand, but do not take too long. I heard in town that your husband has already started making arrangements with the Carlson family. Once he brings that girl into your home, leaving will be much more complicated. Where are you staying? Dorothy asked. If I decide to do this, how would I find you? I am at the boarding house on 2nd Street, room 4. Or you can send word to the Broken Arrow Ranch. Zach pulled a small piece of paper and a pencil from his pocket and quickly sketched a rough map. Here. This is how to reach the property I am trying to buy. If something happens and you need to leave in a hurry, go there. It is empty right now, but there is a shed with a good lock where you could wait safely until I arrive. Dorothy took the paper, her fingers brushing against his as she did. The touch sent a spark of something through her, a connection that felt both foreign and right. She tucked the paper into her dress pocket, knowing she should refuse it, knowing she should tell him this entire conversation was inappropriate and impossible. But she could not bring herself to say the words. Thank you, she said instead, for your kindness today. It has been a long time since anyone showed me such consideration. You deserve kindness, Dorothy, Zach said, and the sound of her first name on his lips sent warmth spreading through her chest. You deserve respect and appreciation, and a life where you do not have to walk through each day bracing for the next insult. I hope you will consider my offer seriously. He tipped his hat to her one more time, then turned and walked back toward town, his long strides carrying him quickly out of sight. Dorothy stood by the river until the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky, her mind churning with impossible possibilities and dangerous hope. When she finally returned to the house, Thomas was already asleep in their bed, snoring softly. Dorothy moved quietly through the darkened rooms, her hand touching the furniture and walls as though saying goodbye. She knew, deep in her bones, that her life was about to change irrevocably. The only question was whether she had the courage to choose the change herself rather than having it forced upon her. The next 3 days passed in a strange fog. Dorothy went through the motions of her daily routine, cooking and cleaning and tending the garden, but her mind was elsewhere. Thomas barely spoke to her except to confirm that Melissa Carlson would be moving into their home in 10 days. He said it matter-of-factly, as though discussing the purchase of a new plow rather than the destruction of their marriage. Dorothy found herself walking into town each afternoon, ostensibly for supplies but really hoping to catch a glimpse of Zach Morrison. She did not see him, though, and began to wonder if she had imagined the entire encounter by the river. Perhaps it had been nothing more than a fever dream, a desperate fantasy conjured by her wounded heart. On the 4th day, she was in the general store examining fabric when Susan Crawford and Martha Henderson cornered her near the thread display. "I hear Thomas is bringing young Melissa into the household," Susan said with false sympathy. "Such a sensible solution to your unfortunate situation. At least this way you will not be completely abandoned." "Yes, I am sure having a fertile woman around will make all the difference," Martha added. "Poor Thomas deserves children after putting up with your deficiency for so long." Dorothy's hands clenched around the bolt of fabric she was holding. For years, she had endured such comments in silence, believing that maintaining her dignity meant refusing to engage. But something had shifted inside her since meeting Zach Morrison. His words had awakened a rebellion she had not known she possessed. "My fertility or lack thereof is none of your concern," Dorothy said clearly, her voice carrying through the store. "And my marriage is certainly not open for your commentary or judgment." Susan's mouth fell open in shock. "Well, I never, no, you probably have not," Dorothy interrupted. "You have not stopped to consider how your words might hurt someone. You have not questioned whether you have any right to pass judgment on situations you know nothing about. You have not exercised even basic human kindness towards someone who has done nothing to harm you." Martha's face flushed red. "How dare you speak to us that way? We are respected members of this community." "Then perhaps you should act like it," Dorothy shot back. "Respected members of a community do not gather in groups to mock and belittle those they consider beneath them. They do not spread gossip and cruelty in the guise of concern. They do not take pleasure in another woman's pain." She set the fabric down and walked toward the door, her heart pounding but her head held high. Behind her, she could hear shocked whispers rippling through the store, but she did not care anymore. Something had broken loose inside her, some chain that had been holding her down, and she felt lighter than she had in years. Outside, the summer sun beat down on the dusty street, and Dorothy stood blinking in the brightness, trying to orient herself. A hand touched her elbow gently, and she turned to find Zach Morrison standing beside her, a slight smile playing around his mouth. "That was quite a performance," he said admiringly. "I was in the back of the store picking up supplies and heard every word." About time someone called those harpies out for their behavior. Dorothy felt a laugh bubble up in her throat, surprising her with its genuine joy. "I do not know what came over me. I have never spoken to anyone that way in my life." "Maybe you have just been waiting for the right moment," Zach suggested. He glanced around the street, noting the curious eyes watching them, and made a quick decision. "Come on. Let me buy you a coffee at the restaurant. You look like you could use something to steady your nerves." Dorothy knew she should refuse. knew that being seen publicly with Zach would only fuel more gossip, but she found she did not care. "That sounds lovely, thank you." The restaurant was a small establishment run by a Chinese family who had come to Spokane during the railway construction. It was one of the few places in town where Dorothy had always felt relatively welcome, perhaps because the Liu family understood what it was like to face prejudice and exclusion. Mrs. Liu greeted them warmly, showing them to a table near the window. "Coffee for both?" she asked, her English heavily accented but clear. "Please," Zach said, "and 2 pieces of whatever pie you have today." When Mrs. Liu had bustled away, Zach leaned back in his chair and studied Dorothy with those intense gray-blue eyes. "Have you given any thought to my offer?" Dorothy wrapped her hands around the warm coffee cup Mrs. Liu had delivered, grateful for something to hold on to. "I have thought of little else. But Zach, you must understand how impossible it seems. I am a married woman. Whatever my personal feelings about Thomas, I made vows before God and the community." "Vows work both ways," Zach pointed out. "He promised to love and cherish you. Has he kept that promise? He promised to forsake all others. Is he keeping that promise by bringing another woman into your home?" "2 wrongs do not make a right," Dorothy said, but her voice lacked conviction. "This is not about right and wrong in some abstract sense," Zach replied. "This is about your life, your happiness, your future. You have one life to live, Dorothy. Do you really want to spend it as an unwanted relic in a house where you are treated with contempt?" Before Dorothy could answer, the door to the restaurant banged open and Thomas strode in, his face purple with rage. Dorothy's stomach dropped as she realized someone must have run to tell him where she was. "Get up," Thomas demanded, stopping at their table. "Get up right now and come home. This is beyond inappropriate." "We are having coffee and pie," Dorothy said, proud that her voice did not shake. "There is nothing inappropriate about it. You are having coffee with another man without my permission or presence," Thomas snarled. "That is the very definition of inappropriate. Now get up before I drag you out of here." Zach stood slowly, his height giving him a considerable advantage over Thomas. "You will not drag anyone anywhere. The lady is perfectly capable of making her own decisions about when she wants to leave." Thomas's hand went to his belt, and Dorothy saw he was carrying a pistol she had not noticed before. Her heart began to race with genuine fear. Thomas had never been violent beyond grabbing her arm, but she could see he was beyond reason now, humiliated by her public defiance. "This is none of your business, Morrison," Thomas said, his voice dangerously low. "This is between me and my wife. You made it my business when you decided to threaten her in public," Zach replied calmly, though Dorothy could see tension in every line of his body. "And from what I have seen, you treat her more like property than a wife. Maybe it is time someone reminded you that she is a human being who deserves respect." "I do not need lessons in marriage from a drifter who has never had a wife of his own," Thomas shot back. "You have no idea what it is like to be stuck with a barren woman who cannot give you the one thing that matters." Something snapped inside Dorothy at those words. She stood up, placing herself between the 2 men. "That is enough, Thomas. You do not get to speak about me that way anymore. You do not get to define my worth by a single function. I am more than a womb with legs, and if you cannot see that, then you never deserved me in the first place." Thomas's eyes widened in shock, then narrowed dangerously. "You are coming home with me right now, or I swear I will make you regret it." "No," Dorothy said simply. "I am not going anywhere with you. Our marriage is over, Thomas. You ended it the moment you decided to bring another woman into our home. You ended it every time you stood by and let this town tear me apart with their cruel words. You ended it when you chose humiliation over love." She turned to Zach, her heart pounding but her decision made. "I accept your offer. If it is still open, I would like to be your partner." Zach's face broke into a wide smile, the first genuine smile she had seen from him. "It is absolutely still open. Go get your things. I will meet you at your house in 1 hour." "Like hell you will," Thomas exploded, reaching for Dorothy's arm. But Zach moved faster, catching Thomas's wrist in an iron grip. "You have two choices," Zach said quietly, his voice deadly calm. "You can let her go peacefully and deal with the embarrassment of a failed marriage. Or you can try to force her to stay. And I will make sure every person in this territory knows exactly how you treated her. I will tell them about the bruises on her arm, about how you stood by while she was mocked and insulted, about your plans to bring in a younger wife. Which do you think will be worse for your reputation?" Thomas jerked his arm free, his face contorted with fury and shame. "Fine, take her. Take the Barren cow, see how you like it when she fails you too, but do not come crawling back, Dorothy. Once you walk out that door, you are dead to me. Dead to this whole town." "I can live with that," Dorothy said, surprised by how much she meant it. She walked out of the restaurant with her head high, Zach close behind her. Outside, a crowd had gathered, drawn by the commotion. Dorothy recognized most of the faces. Her neighbors, people she had known for years, people who had watched her humiliation and done nothing to help. Now they stared at her with a mixture of shock, judgment, and a few with grudging admiration. Martha Henderson pushed to the front of the crowd. "You are making a terrible mistake, Dorothy Fletcher. Running off with a strange man, abandoning your marriage vows. You will be ruined, completely ruined." "I was already ruined in your eyes," Dorothy replied. "At least now I am choosing my own ruin on my own terms." She did not wait for a response, just started walking toward her house with Zach beside her. The crowd parted for them, and Dorothy felt a strange sense of freedom washing over her. For the first time in years, she was taking control of her own life, making a choice that was entirely hers. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. At the house, Dorothy moved quickly, gathering her few personal possessions, her mother's Bible, a photograph of her parents, the simple jewelry she owned, and a change of clothes. She left behind everything Thomas had bought for her, wanting nothing that would tie her to this place or this life. Zach helped her bundle everything into a small bag, his movements efficient and practiced. "Are you sure about this?" he asked quietly as she took one last look around the house that had been her home for 5 years. "Once we leave, there is no going back." "I know," Dorothy said. "And yes, I am sure. I do not know what the future holds, but I know it has to be better than this." They left through the back door, avoiding the crowd that had likely followed them from town. Zach had his horse tied up near the river, a sturdy buckskin gelding with intelligent eyes. He helped Dorothy mount, then swung up behind her, his arms coming around her to grasp the reins. "Hold on," he said, his breath warm against her ear. "It is about a 4-hour ride to the property." As the horse moved into a smooth canter, carrying them away from Spokane and into the hills beyond, Dorothy felt tears streaming down her face. But these were different tears than the ones she had shed by the river. These were tears of release, of fear and hope, and the strange, wild joy of taking a leap into the unknown. Zach did not try to speak during the ride, seeming to understand that she needed this time to process everything that had happened. The landscape rolled by, pine forests giving way to open meadows, the Spokane River appearing and disappearing as they followed the winding trail north. The summer afternoon was hot, but the movement of the horse created a pleasant breeze that dried Dorothy's tears and cooled her flushed cheeks. By the time the sun was setting, they crested a hill and Dorothy gasped at the view spread out before them. A green valley stretched out below, bisected by a clear creek that caught the golden light like a ribbon of fire. A small house stood near the creek, modest but well built, with a barn and several outbuildings arranged nearby. Cattle grazed in the distant meadows, and the whole scene had an air of peaceful isolation that spoke to something deep in Dorothy's soul. "This is it," Zach said, pride evident in his voice. "The property I have been saving for. I made the final payment 3 days ago. It is officially mine as of yesterday. Ours, if you are still willing to share it with me." "It is beautiful," Dorothy breathed, unable to take her eyes off the sight. "I never imagined anything like this." They rode down into the valley as the last light faded from the sky. Zach dismounted first, then helped Dorothy down, his hand steady on her waist. For a moment they stood close together, the reality of their situation settling over them both. "I want to be clear about something," Zach said seriously. "I meant what I said about this being a partnership. You do not owe me anything beyond honest work and fair dealing. The bedroom in the house is yours. I will sleep in the barn until such time as you decide differently, if you ever do." Dorothy felt a rush of gratitude for his consideration. "Thank you. I know this situation is unconventional, and I appreciate you understanding that I need time." "We have all the time in the world," Zach assured her. "Now let me show you the house." The interior of the house was rustic but clean, clearly maintained by someone who cared about the property, even if they had not lived there recently. One large room served as kitchen and living space, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. A single bedroom opened off the back, surprisingly spacious, with a real bed frame and a chest of drawers. The previous owner was a widow, Zach explained as Dorothy explored. She moved to Seattle to live with her daughter after her husband passed. "Everything here is included in the sale. Furniture, tools, even some supplies in the pantry." She said she wanted it to go to someone who would appreciate it and build a life here. Dorothy ran her hand over the smooth wood of the kitchen table, imagining meals shared here, conversations held, a life built day by day. "I will do my best to honor her wishes." Over the following weeks, Dorothy and Zach fell into a comfortable routine. They rose with the sun, worked hard throughout the day, and spent their evenings sharing meals and conversation. Zach proved to be an easy companion, with a dry sense of humor and a wealth of stories from his years working ranches across the territory. Dorothy found herself laughing more than she had in years, found herself relaxing into a version of herself she had almost forgotten existed. She threw herself into fixing up the house and surrounding property, planting a larger garden, mending fences, and organizing the barn. Zach never told her what to do, but instead asked her opinion on decisions and listened carefully to her suggestions. It was a novel experience, being treated as an equal partner rather than a subordinate, and Dorothy flourished under the respect and attention. As summer turned toward fall, Dorothy realized she was falling in love with Zachary Morrison. It happened gradually, in small moments. The way he brought her wildflowers when he rode the fence line, the way he always made sure she ate enough at meals, the way his face lit up when he saw her each morning. He never pushed for more than friendship, never made her feel obligated or pressured, and that very restraint made her want him all the more. One evening in late September, as they sat on the porch watching the stars come out, Dorothy finally worked up the courage to speak her heart. "Zach, I need to tell you something." He turned to look at her, his expression open and attentive. "I am listening." "I am falling in love with you," Dorothy said simply. "I do not know if that is what you want to hear, and I understand if you do not feel the same way. But I could not go another day without being honest about my feelings." Zach was silent for a long moment, and Dorothy's heart sank, fearing she had misread the situation entirely. Then he reached out and took her hand, his thumb brushing gently across her knuckles. "I have been in love with you since that first day by the corral," he said quietly. "I saw your strength and your dignity, and I knew you were someone special. Every day since has only confirmed that first impression. But I did not want to pressure you, did not want you to feel like you had to return my feelings out of obligation or gratitude." Joy bloomed in Dorothy's chest, warm and bright. "There is no obligation here. This is genuine, real. You have shown me what it means to be valued and respected, and I want to build a real life with you, not just a partnership but a marriage in truth." Zach cupped her face in his hands, his eyes searching hers. "Are you absolutely certain? Because once we take this step, I will not let you go. You will be mine and I will be yours completely." "I am certain," Dorothy whispered. "I have never been more certain of anything." He kissed her then, soft and gentle at first, then deeper as she responded. It was nothing like the perfunctory kisses Thomas had given her. This was a kiss full of promise and passion, a claiming and a surrender all at once. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Dorothy felt as though she had been set on fire in the most wonderful way. That night, Zach moved his few belongings from the barn to the house, and Dorothy welcomed him into the bed that had been hers alone. Their lovemaking was tender and passionate, a revelation for Dorothy who had only ever known hurried couplings in the dark with Thomas. Zach took his time, exploring her body with reverence, making sure she found pleasure before seeking his own. Afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, Dorothy felt complete in a way she never had before. Autumn passed in a golden haze of happiness. They worked the ranch together, building up the herd and making improvements to the property. In November, they made the trip to Spokane to buy winter supplies and to file the necessary papers to dissolve Dorothy's marriage to Thomas. The process was surprisingly simple. Thomas had apparently been all too eager to sign the divorce papers, especially once Zach made it clear he had sworn statements from witnesses regarding Thomas's treatment of Dorothy. The town treated them with predictable scorn, but Dorothy found she did not care. She had Zach, she had a home she loved, and she had a future full of possibilities. The opinions of small-minded people meant nothing anymore. Winter came with deep snows that isolated them for weeks at a time. Dorothy had feared the confinement might strain their relationship, but instead, it only brought them closer. They spent long evenings by the fire, talking about their dreams and plans, making love with increasing passion and confidence, building a foundation of trust and intimacy that would sustain them through any challenge. In late February, Dorothy woke one morning feeling nauseated. At first, she attributed it to something she had eaten, but when the nausea persisted for several days, accompanied by unusual fatigue and tender breasts, a cautious hope began to grow. She said nothing to Zach, not wanting to raise his expectations if she was wrong, but she counted the weeks since her last monthly courses and realized with dawning wonder that she had missed 2 cycles. By March, there was no doubt. Dorothy was pregnant. She waited until she was absolutely certain, until the small swell of her belly was undeniable, before telling Zach. She chose a sunny afternoon when they were working in the barn together, the spring warmth finally melting the last of the winter snow. "Zach, I have something to tell you," she said, setting down the pitchfork she had been using to spread fresh hay. He looked up from the bridle he was mending, immediately attentive to the serious tone in her voice. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong," Dorothy assured him quickly. "In fact, something is very right. Zach, I am pregnant. We are going to have a baby." For a moment he just stared at her, his expression frozen in shock. Then his face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen, and he crossed the space between them in 3 long strides, sweeping her up in his arms and spinning her around. "A baby," he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "We are having a baby. Dorothy, are you absolutely sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor," Dorothy said, laughing at his enthusiasm. "But all the signs are there, and I have been counting the weeks. I think the baby will come in October around harvest time." Zach set her down gently, his hands moving to her still flat stomach with reverence. "This is incredible. You are incredible. How are you feeling? You need to rest. Should you even be working in the barn, I am fine," Dorothy assured him, touched by his concern. "Women have been having babies while working farms for thousands of years. I will rest when I need to, but for now, I want to keep up my normal routine." Over the following months, they prepared for the baby's arrival with growing excitement. Zach built a beautiful cradle from cherry wood, carving intricate designs into the headboard. Dorothy sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her hands moving with practiced skill despite the nervous flutter in her chest. They discussed names endlessly, wanting something that honored both their families while giving their child a fresh start. In early May, they made another trip to Spokane, this time to see a different doctor, one from Seattle who was visiting the territory. Dr. William Chen examined Dorothy thoroughly and declared her pregnancy healthy and progressing normally. "I see no reason why you should not carry this baby to term and deliver without complications," he told them, his kind eyes crinkling with a smile. "You are young, strong, and clearly well cared for. Continue doing what you have been doing, and I expect you will have a fine baby come autumn." As they left the doctor's office, Dorothy saw Susan Crawford across the street, her expression twisted with something that looked like envy and rage. Dorothy simply nodded politely and walked on, Zach's hand warm and protective on the small of her back. She had no interest in gloating or seeking validation from people who had treated her so poorly. Her happiness was its own reward. Word of her pregnancy spread through Spokane quickly, and Dorothy knew people would be gossiping about the timeline, trying to determine if she had been pregnant before leaving Thomas. She did not care about their calculations or their judgments. She knew the truth. This baby had been conceived in love, in the warmth and safety of her new life with Zach, and that was all that mattered. Summer passed in a blur of final preparations and growing anticipation. Dorothy's belly swelled impressively, and she marveled at the feeling of the baby moving inside her, tiny kicks and rolls that never failed to bring tears to her eyes. Zach talked to her stomach every night, telling the baby stories about the ranch and the life they would build together. His tenderness and excitement only deepened Dorothy's love for him. In late September, Dorothy went into labor. It was a long, difficult process that lasted through the night and into the next afternoon. Zach stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, offering encouragement even when Dorothy was sure she could not go on. Finally, as the sun began to set on the second day, their son came into the world with a lusty cry that filled the small house with joy. "A boy," the midwife announced, placing the squirming, red-faced baby on Dorothy's chest. "A big, healthy boy." Dorothy looked down at her son, at his dark hair and scrunched-up face, and felt her heart expand to accommodate a love she had never imagined possible. Zach leaned over them both, tears streaming unashamedly down his face as he touched the baby's tiny hand with one gentle finger. "He is perfect," Zach whispered. "You are both perfect. Thank you, Dorothy. Thank you for this gift." They named him Daniel Zachary Morrison, and he became the center of their world. Zach proved to be a devoted father, rising in the night to bring the baby to Dorothy for feeding, changing diapers without complaint, and spending hours just watching Daniel sleep with wonder on his face. In the spring following Daniel's birth, they made their final trip to Spokane. This time, it was to be legally married in the eyes of the law, now that Dorothy's divorce was finalized. They chose to have the ceremony performed by the justice of the peace rather than in a church, wanting something simple and private. As they left the courthouse, newly married and with baby Daniel bundled in Dorothy's arms, they encountered a small group of people waiting for them. Dorothy tensed, expecting more judgment and cruelty, but was surprised to see apologetic expressions on several faces. Mrs. Liu from the Chinese restaurant stepped forward first. "Mrs. Morrison, we wanted to say congratulations, and also to apologize. Some of us in this town have been thinking about how we treated you, and we are ashamed. You deserved better." Behind her stood several other townspeople, including the couple who ran the boarding house and the young clerk from the general store. They were a small group, hardly representing the whole town, but their presence meant something. "Thank you," Dorothy said quietly. "I appreciate your words, though I cannot say they undo the hurt. But I have learned that carrying anger only poisons the carrier, so I accept your apology." Susan Crawford appeared at the edge of the group, her face haggard. "Dorothy, I owe you the greatest apology of all. I was cruel to you, unforgivably cruel because I was envious. You were young and pretty, and I convinced myself that your inability to have children meant you were getting what you deserved for having advantages I did not. But I was wrong, so terribly wrong. I hope someday you can forgive me." Dorothy looked at the woman who had tormented her for so long and felt a strange sort of pity. Susan Crawford's life had not changed. She was still trapped in the same cycles of judgment and cruelty, still measuring her worth by the number of children she could produce. In contrast, Dorothy had built a life based on love and partnership, and the difference showed in every aspect of their beings. "I forgive you, Susan," Dorothy said simply. "Not for your sake, but for mine. I will not carry your cruelty with me any longer." As they rode out of Spokane for the last time, Dorothy looked back at the town that had once been her whole world and felt nothing but relief. That chapter of her life was closed, finished, and she was free to write the next chapters however she chose. The years that followed were filled with hard work and deep satisfaction. The ranch prospered under their joint management, the herd growing and the land yielding good crops. Daniel grew into a sturdy, happy child, followed 3 years later by a daughter they named Rose Dorothy, and 2 years after that by another son, Michael Thomas, named for Dorothy's late father whose middle name had been Thomas. As Dorothy watched her children play in the yard one summer afternoon, Zach came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. "Happy?" he asked, his lips brushing the shell of her ear. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Dorothy replied honestly. "Some days I still cannot believe this is my life." "Believe it," Zach said firmly. "You built this life through courage and strength. You chose happiness over security, love over obligation, and you have never looked back. That takes a rare kind of bravery." Dorothy turned in his arms, looking up at the man who had changed everything. His face was more weathered now, lines of laughter and hard work etched around his eyes and mouth, but he was more handsome to her than ever. "We built this life together. I could not have done it without you." "We are partners," Zach agreed, kissing her softly. "In everything, always." News from Spokane reached them occasionally through travelers and mail deliveries. They learned that Thomas had eventually married Melissa Carlson, but the marriage had not produced the children he craved. Melissa had proven to be as barren as Dorothy supposedly was, and Thomas's bitterness had grown until Melissa finally left him, returning to her father's house. Thomas now lived alone on his small ranch, a cautionary tale about the dangers of valuing the wrong things. Dorothy felt no satisfaction in his misery, only a distant sadness for the life they both could have had if he had chosen differently. But she did not dwell on it. Her energy was focused on the present and future, on the family she and Zach were raising and the legacy they were building. When Daniel was 7, he asked Dorothy one day why they did not visit Spokane like some of the other ranching families did. Dorothy and Zach had carefully avoided discussing the painful details of Dorothy's first marriage with the children, not wanting to burden them with adult complexities. "Spokane was not a happy place for me when I was younger," Dorothy explained carefully. "Some of the people there were not kind to me, but then I met your father and he helped me see that I deserved better. So we built our life here instead where we could be happy." "Were you scared?" Daniel asked with the directness of childhood. "When you left, terrified," Dorothy admitted. "I was leaving everything I knew to go with a man I had just met, but I was more scared of staying in a place where I was treated poorly. Sometimes the scariest choice is actually the bravest one." Daniel thought about that for a moment. "I am glad you were brave, Mama. Otherwise, Rose and Michael and I would not be here." "I am glad too, sweetheart," Dorothy said, pulling him close for a hug. "So very glad." As the years passed, Dorothy and Zach's ranch became known throughout the territory as one of the most successful operations in the region. They employed several ranch hands, treated them fairly, and earned reputations as tough but honest dealers. Other ranchers sought Zach's advice on cattle management, and Dorothy became known for her skill with horses, able to gentle even the most difficult animals. Their children grew strong and healthy, educated through a combination of Dorothy's teaching and occasional visits from a traveling school teacher who made rounds to the remote ranches. Daniel showed a natural talent for ranching and declared his intention to stay and run the operation someday. Rose inherited her mother's way with animals and spent hours in the barn, caring for every creature with gentle dedication. Michael, the youngest, had his father's quiet strength and his mother's determination, a combination that promised great things. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Zach surprised Dorothy with a trip to Seattle, their first real vacation since leaving Spokane. They left the children in the care of their most trusted ranch hand and his wife, and set off on the long journey west. Seattle was a revelation, a bustling city full of noise and opportunity. They stayed in a real hotel, ate in restaurants, and walked along the waterfront watching ships from around the world come and go. One afternoon, as they strolled through Pike Place Market, Zach stopped at a jeweler's stall and purchased a beautiful gold ring set with a small sapphire. "I know we have wedding bands," he said as he slipped it onto Dorothy's finger alongside the simple gold band they had exchanged 10 years earlier. "But I wanted to give you something special, something that represents not just our wedding but the entire life we have built together." Dorothy looked at the ring through tear-blurred eyes, watching how it caught the light. "It is beautiful, but Zach, you did not need to spend money on something like this." "I wanted to," Zach said firmly. "You deserve beautiful things, Dorothy. You deserve to be celebrated and cherished." "I know I tell you that often, but I wanted you to have something tangible to remind you whenever you look at your hand." That night, in their hotel room overlooking Elliott Bay, they made love with the passion and tenderness that had only deepened over the years. Afterward, lying in each other's arms with the sound of the city drifting through the open window, Dorothy reflected on the incredible journey her life had taken. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you had not spoken to me that day?" Dorothy asked quietly. If you had just kept walking past the corral. Zach was silent for a moment, his hand tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. I think about it sometimes, he admitted, and it terrifies me. The thought of you trapped in that situation, your spirit slowly being crushed, and me never knowing what I was missing. I do not believe much in fate, but I am grateful for whatever force put me in that place at that time. I am grateful too, Dorothy said. You saved my life, Zach. Not in a dramatic sense, but in the truest way possible. You showed me I was worth saving, worth choosing, worth loving. Everything good in my life now flows from that moment. We saved each other, Zach corrected gently. I was drifting before I met you, working job to job with no real purpose beyond basic survival. You gave me something to build toward, a reason to put down roots and create something lasting. We are better together than we ever could have been apart. They returned to the ranch, refreshed and reconnected, throwing themselves back into the work and the children with renewed energy. The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of ranch life. Calving season and branding, planting and harvest, long winters spent cozy by the fire and bright summers full of hard work and simple pleasures. When Dorothy was 35, she discovered she was pregnant again, a surprise baby that came 12 years after Michael's birth. This time, she gave birth to twin girls, Emma and Grace, who were beautiful and demanding in equal measure. The older children pitched in to help, and the house rang with laughter and chaos in the best possible way. Watching Zach with the twins, his patience seemingly endless as he walked the floor with a crying baby on each shoulder, Dorothy marveled at how far they had both come. The frightened, hurting woman who had fled Spokane 15 years earlier would barely recognize the confident, contented woman she had become. One evening, when the twins were about 2 years old and the older children were helping with the dinner dishes, there was a knock at the door. Visitors were unusual enough that everyone stopped what they were doing to see who it was. Zach opened the door to reveal an older woman, elegantly dressed despite the dust of travel, with kind eyes and a hesitant smile. I am sorry to intrude, she said in a cultured voice. I am looking for Dorothy Fletcher. I was told in Spokane that she might be living at this ranch now. Dorothy came to the door, wiping her hands on her apron, and studied the stranger. There was something familiar about her, though Dorothy could not place it. I am Dorothy Morrison, formerly Fletcher, she said cautiously. May I ask who you are? The woman's smile widened. You would not remember me. I am Catherine Morrison, Dr. Morrison's wife. I am Zach's aunt by marriage. Understanding dawned, and Dorothy glanced at Zach, who looked equally surprised. He had mentioned his aunt a few times over the years, always with fondness, noting that she had been one of the few kind people in his uncle's household. Please come in, Dorothy said, stepping back to allow her entrance. You have traveled a long way. Let me get you some coffee and something to eat. As Catherine settled at the kitchen table, the children hovering curiously in the background, she explained her visit. My husband passed away 6 months ago. Liver disease brought on by his drinking. Before he died, he confessed something to me that has weighed on my conscience ever since. He told me that he had lied about you, Dorothy. That night at the church social, when he declared you barren, he had no medical basis for saying such a thing. He was drunk and angry because you had refused to allow him to examine you without a female chaperone present earlier that week. He wanted to humiliate you to punish you for questioning his authority. The kitchen fell silent except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. Dorothy sank into a chair, her mind reeling. She had suspected as much, of course, had known deep down that doctor. Morrison's pronouncement was baseless, but hearing it confirmed still sent shockwaves through her. "Why are you telling me this now?" Dorothy asked quietly. "He is dead. What difference does it make?" "Because you deserve to know the truth," Catherine said, tears streaming down her lined face. "Because I stood by and said nothing while my husband destroyed your reputation and your marriage. I was a coward, too afraid of his temper to speak up, and I have had to live with that shame. When I heard through the town gossip that you had left Thomas and built a new life, that you had children and were happy, I knew I had to come and tell you the truth. I owe you that much, even if it comes too late." Dorothy reached across the table and took Catherine's hand. "It is not too late. I appreciate you coming all this way to tell me, and while I am angry at your husband for what he did, I do not blame you for his actions. We all do what we must to survive." Catherine squeezed her hand gratefully. "You are more gracious than I deserve, but there is more. In his will, my husband left me everything, and it is substantial. He was not a good man, but he was a successful doctor, and he invested wisely. I have more money than I will ever need, and no children to leave it to. I would like to make amends for his cruelty by helping you and your family. Please, let me set up a trust for your children's education, or help you expand the ranch, or anything else you might need." Zach and Dorothy exchanged a long look, communicating silently in the way of couples who have spent years together. Finally, Dorothy smiled and shook her head. "We appreciate the offer, truly, but we do not need money. We have built a good life here through our own work, and we are proud of that. However, there is something else you could do if you are willing." "Anything," Catherine said eagerly. "There are other women in Spokane who are suffering the way I did," Dorothy said thoughtfully. "Women who are judged and condemned for things they cannot control, who are trapped in bad situations with no way out. Use your money to help them. Set up a fund for women who need to leave abusive marriages. Support education for girls so they have options beyond marriage. Be the voice speaking up for those who cannot speak for themselves." Catherine's face lit up with purpose. "Yes, yes, I can do that. What a perfect way to counteract the harm my husband caused. Thank you, Dorothy, for showing me how to turn guilt into something useful." She stayed for dinner, and the conversation turned to lighter topics. Catherine was delightful company, full of stories about her travels and her plans for the future. When she left the next morning, she extracted promises that they would visit her in Seattle, and she would return to see the children. After she left, Zach pulled Dorothy into his arms. "That was generous of you, suggesting she help other women. You could have taken her money." "We do not need her money," Dorothy said simply. "We have everything that matters right here. But if some good can come from Dr. Morrison's cruelty, then at least it will not have been entirely meaningless." As the children grew older and more independent, Dorothy found herself with time to pursue interests beyond ranch work. She began writing down her story, not for publication but for her children and grandchildren, wanting them to understand the journey she and Zach had taken. She wrote about the cruelty of Spokane, but also about the courage it took to leave, the risk of trusting a stranger, and the incredible reward of choosing love over security. Daniel married at 21, bringing home a bright, capable young woman named Sarah who fit into the family, as though she had always been there. They built a small house on the northern edge of the property and began raising their own children, ensuring the ranch would continue into the next generation. Rose, true to her nature, became a veterinarian, one of the first women in Washington Territory to pursue that career. She traveled throughout the region, caring for animals and earning respect through her skill and dedication. She eventually married a fellow veterinarian, and they set up a practice in Wenatchee. Michael took after his father, quiet and steady, with a gift for business. He helped expand the ranch's operations, establishing contracts with buyers in Seattle and San Francisco that ensured consistent profits. He married a schoolteacher, and they had 4 children who kept the ranch house lively. The twins, Emma and Grace, were inseparable through childhood and beyond. They eventually opened a store in a nearby town, selling goods produced on the ranch and by other local artisans. Their business thrived, and they became known throughout the territory for their fair dealing and quality products. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Dorothy and Zach sat on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the valley they had built into a thriving ranch. Their hair was streaked with gray now, their hands work-worn, but their love had only deepened with time. "You have any regrets?" Zach asked, taking her hand and bringing it to his lips. Dorothy thought about the question carefully, then shook her head. "Not a single one. My life did not turn out the way I expected when I was young, but it turned out so much better than I could have imagined. I have you. I have our children and grandchildren. I have this beautiful place we have built together. What could I possibly regret? I worried, in the early days, that you might come to resent me," Zach admitted. "That you might feel I had taken you away from your home and forced you into a life of hardship." "You gave me a choice," Dorothy corrected gently. "That is what made all the difference. You offered me an option when I had none, and you respected my decision even though it was risky for both of us. You never tried to control me or diminish me. You treated me as an equal partner from the very beginning. That is not something to resent. It is something to treasure." As darkness fell and stars began to appear in the vast sky, they sat together in comfortable silence. The sounds of the ranch drifted through the evening air. Cattle lowing, horses moving in the corral, a coyote calling in the distance. These were the sounds of home, of a life well lived, of dreams realized through courage and love. The people of Spokane had laughed at the Barren woman, had mocked her and condemned her and declared her worthless. But when the cowboy stepped beside her and faced the town with her, everything changed. Not because he fought her battles or solved her problems, but because he showed her that she had worth regardless of what others thought. He gave her the courage to choose herself, to walk away from cruelty and toward hope. And in the end, the laughter of small-minded people meant nothing compared to the life they built together. Dorothy Morrison would never be defined by what she could not do, but rather by what she chose to do when given the chance. She chose courage, she chose love, and she chose to believe that she deserved better than what she had been offered. That choice made all the difference, transforming a frightened young woman into a force of nature who built a legacy that would last for generations. Years continued to pass, marking Dorothy and Zach's journey together through the seasons of life. When Dorothy was 50, she received word that Thomas Fletcher had passed away from pneumonia, dying alone in the small house where she had once lived. She attended the funeral, not out of lingering affection, but out of respect for the years they had shared and closure for the chapter he represented. Standing by his grave, with Zach's steady presence beside her, Dorothy felt only peace. She had long since forgiven Thomas for his failures, understanding that he too had been a product of the harsh frontier culture that measured people's worth by narrow standards. He had lacked the imagination to see beyond those standards, and it had cost him everything. She hoped he had found some measure of peace before the end. By their 30th anniversary, Dorothy and Zach were grandparents many times over, with a sprawling family that gathered at the ranch every summer for a massive celebration. Those gatherings filled the house and grounds with laughter and love, with children chasing each other through the fields while the adults shared stories and memories. One summer evening during such a gathering, Dorothy's eldest granddaughter, named Dorothy after her, approached with a question. Grandma, my teacher said that women in your time had very few choices. But you had a whole ranch and raised 5 children and helped build something amazing. How did you do it? Dorothy smiled, pulling the girl close. I did have choices, sweetheart, but I had to fight for them. I had to decide that my own happiness and well-being mattered as much as anyone else's. That was the hardest choice of all, but it was also the most important. Once I made that choice, everything else followed. Were people mean to you because you did not follow the rules? Young Dorothy asked with the perceptiveness of the young. Some people were, yes, Dorothy admitted. They thought I should stay in a situation that was hurting me because leaving meant breaking social conventions. But I learned that other people's rules do not have to govern your life, especially when those rules are designed to keep you small and powerless. I want to be like you when I grow up, the girl declared with fierce determination. Strong and brave and not caring what mean people think. Then I will tell you the secret, Dorothy said, touching the girl's cheek gently. The secret is that you do care what mean people think, at least at first. It hurts when people judge you and condemn you. But you choose to act despite that hurt. And eventually, the hurt gets smaller and your courage gets bigger. And one day you wake up and realize that you have built a life so full of love and purpose that there is no room left for other people's cruelty. As the years advanced, Dorothy and Zach began to slow down, turning more of the ranch operations over to Daniel and Michael while they focused on smaller projects and enjoying their grandchildren. They took up new hobbies. Zach carved beautiful wooden figurines while Dorothy painted watercolors of the valley she loved so much. On their 40th anniversary, the entire family gathered for the largest celebration the ranch had ever seen. Children and grandchildren came from across Washington Territory and beyond, filling every inch of the expanded house and spilling out into tents set up across the grounds. There were 3 generations present, all of them connected by the courageous choice 2 people had made 4 decades earlier. During the celebration, Daniel stood to make a toast, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. To my parents, who showed all of us what real love looks like. Not the easy love that comes when everything is perfect, but the brave love that chooses to build something new when the old structure crumbles. They taught us that family is not just about blood, but about choosing each other every single day. They taught us that courage is not the absence of fear, but action in the face of it. And they taught us that a good life is not given to you, it is built through hard work, determination, and faith in each other. The crowd raised their glasses, and Dorothy felt tears streaming down her face as she looked around at all these people who existed, because she and Zach had been brave enough to take a chance on each other. Every face present represented a choice they had made 40 years ago, a choice to believe in possibilities rather than accepting limitations. That night, after everyone had gone to bed or retired to their tents, Dorothy and Zach sat alone on their porch one more time. The valley stretched out before them, bathed in moonlight, every fence line and building representing years of shared effort and dreams realized. We did good, didn't we? Dorothy said softly, her hand clasped in Zach's weathered one. We did better than good, Zach replied, his voice full of satisfaction. We built something that will last long after we are gone. Not just the ranch, but the family, the values, the example. That is a legacy worth being proud of. I love you, Zachary Morrison, Dorothy said, turning to look at the man who had changed everything. His face was deeply lined now, his hair pure white, but his gray-blue eyes still held the same kindness and strength that had first drawn her to him. I have loved you for 40 years, and I will love you for whatever time we have left. And I love you, Dorothy Morrison, Zach replied, kissing her gently. You are the best decision I ever made, the greatest adventure I ever took. Thank you for being brave enough to come with me that day." They sat together under the stars, two people who had faced down judgment and cruelty and emerged victorious, not through force but through the simple act of choosing love and building a life based on mutual respect and genuine partnership. The town had laughed at the barren woman, but she had the last laugh, building a family and legacy that would endure for generations. Dorothy lived to see her great-grandchildren born, to watch the ranch expand further and prosper under Daniel's management, to witness Rose's veterinary practice become one of the most respected in the territory. She saw Michael's business acumen transform their small ranch into a commercial operation that supplied beef to markets across the Pacific Northwest. She watched Emma and Grace's store become a landmark, a place where people from miles around came not just for goods but for the warm hospitality the twins were known for. On a warm September afternoon, when Dorothy was 68 years old, she passed away peacefully in her sleep, Zach holding her hand. Her funeral was the largest the territory had ever seen, with people traveling from across Washington to pay their respects to a woman who had lived her life on her own terms and inspired countless others to do the same. Zach lived another 5 years after Dorothy's passing, tended lovingly by his children and grandchildren. He spent those years finishing the projects they had started together, writing down stories about their life for future generations, and visiting Dorothy's grave every single day. When he finally joined her, he was laid to rest beside her in the family cemetery on the hill overlooking the valley they had built together. Their story became legend in the family, passed down through generations as an example of what courage and love could accomplish. Young women facing difficult choices would hear about their great-great-grandmother Dorothy, who had walked away from an impossible situation and built a new life from nothing. Young men would hear about their great-great-grandfather Zach, who had offered respect and partnership instead of demanding submission and control. The ranch continued to prosper, eventually becoming one of the largest operations in eastern Washington. But it never lost the heart that Dorothy and Zach had given it, the sense that people mattered more than profits, that treating others with dignity was more important than following conventions, that love and family were the true measures of success. In the house that Zach had shown Dorothy on that long-ago sunset ride, new generations were born and raised, each one carrying forward the values their ancestors had fought for. The bedroom where Dorothy had welcomed Zach on their first night together remained a special place, preserved with care, where couples in each generation spent their wedding nights, connecting to the love story that had started it all. The valley itself became known throughout the territory as Morrison Valley, a place of prosperity and peace where people worked hard and treated each other fairly. Travelers spoke of the warmth they received there, the sense that in this one corner of the frontier, something had been built that transcended the usual harsh realities of frontier life. And on quiet evenings, when the sunset painted the sky in brilliant colors, and the cattle moved peacefully through the fields, those who lived in Morrison Valley swore they could sometimes feel the presence of Dorothy and Zach, still watching over the land and family they had created, still present in every fence post and flower garden, still whispering encouragement to anyone brave enough to choose love over convention, courage over comfort. The town of Spokane eventually grew into a city, shedding its frontier roughness for urban sophistication. The people who had mocked Dorothy Fletcher passed away, their names forgotten while hers lived on. The small-mindedness that had driven her away was eventually replaced by broader thinking, though the evolution came too late for those who had suffered under the old ways. But in Morrison Valley, The legacy of one woman's courage and one man's respect created something that endured long past their lifetimes. They had proven that love built on equality and mutual respect could weather any storm, that choosing courage over comfort could lead to extraordinary rewards, that being laughed at by small-minded people was nothing compared to the satisfaction of building a life of purpose and meaning. They had faced the town together, and in doing so, they had won. Not by defeating their critics or proving them wrong, but by simply living so well that criticism became irrelevant. Their love story became a testament to the power of choosing yourself, of believing that you deserve happiness, of trusting that courage can lead you out of darkness and into light. And so the story of Dorothy Fletcher Morrison and Zachary Morrison lived on, a reminder that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from what is familiar and toward what is possible, that sometimes love comes when you least expect it from the most unexpected sources, and that building a life of meaning requires nothing more than courage, determination, and someone willing to stand beside you and face whatever comes together. The end.